The Adobe Camera Raw plugin, referred to from now on as ACR, is available from within Photoshop and within Bridge. When you're in Photoshop, you can only open up your RAW files in Adobe Camera Raw, ACR, using Photoshop. But when you happen to be in Bridge, you actually have the choice of using either Photoshop or Bridge to process your RAW files. They're both identical. There's no difference between the two. It's just a matter of choice. Now the big question is, why would you ever want to shoot in RAW? Well, in order to answer that question, we need to discuss the advantages of the RAW file format versus the JPEG format. For one thing, RAW images are not processed in your camera like JPEGs are. You have to use a RAW interpreter such as Adobe Camera Raw. I will try to refer to this as ACR in the future, which comes with Photoshop and comes with Bridge. It's also inside Adobe Lightroom for those of you that are a little bit familiar with Lightroom. They're all identical. They're all by the same company. JPEGs are processed in camera, so if you ever overexpose your shot, well, I guess you are kind of sunk. If your highlights are blown out in the JPEG file format, you really don't have any hope of recovering any of that blown out / lost highlight detail. Same thing with your shadows. If your shadows are blocked up because of your exposure incorrectness, if you will, when you're shooting with the JPEG file format, it's all processed in camera and you have no way of really opening up that information without introducing a lot of JPEG artifacting and a lot of garbage and crap in your image. But if you were to shoot in RAW, now this is where you have a lot of great advantage. Number one, if you happen to overexpose your image, you can actually recover those blown out highlight details. And I'm just going to use a bride and groom, traditional North American bride and groom. Bride's wearing a white dress, got a lot of detail going on the dress, and the groom is wearing a traditional dark black tuxedo. Now, the bride's dress, if you blow out the details in the bride's dress in JPEG, you're sunk. You got no way of recovering any of that lost detail. However, if you're shooting in the RAW file format, you have the ability to pull back lost or blown out detail, and some people say and make a claim that you actually have the equivalent of 2 f-stops that you can actually recover that detail. That's pretty amazing. Same thing goes on with your shadow end. Notice that the traditional black tuxedo that a guy would wear has probably 3 different types of black fabric on it. That stripe that goes down the outside of the legs, that's one fabric which reflects light differently than the main fabric, and then the collars and the flaps on the pockets and all that kind of stuff reflect a little bit differently. If we happen to block up our shadow ends, in Camera Raw we have the ability to open up that so we can see the separation between the 3 different types of black fabric. This is absolutely a lifesaver for us, or for those of us who just don't get the exposure properly. Something happened, who knows what, we can actually now go back. Now, the other thing that's really, really important to understand is we are working with a RAW file here. And if we decide that we wanted to interpret that RAW file in a certain fashion today, we can come back and we can reinterpret that same RAW file with a different visual outcome without ever harming the original information. When we move these sliders all around, when we move all of these sliders up and down here, back and forth, left and right, whatever it is that we do, all we're doing is creating what's known as an XMP file, which is just a text file which tells the image how to look. We can reinterpret that a kabillion different times, and we're never going to alter the original information. I think that is absolutely fantastic. Okay, another reason to shoot RAW is that you capture approximately 8 times the information that a JPEG is capable of containing. That alone should be enough reason for you to want to shoot in RAW. To try to understand this, let's go back to the 256 numbers that you keep hearing about. At least I hope you keep hearing about. We know that most of the images that we are used to working with in Photoshop are 8-bit images. 8-bit images are also referred to as 24-bit color. 8-bit, 3 color channels, 3 times 8, 24. I don't want to get all caught up into a lot of the technical stuff when it comes to that. Just know that your JPEGs are traditionally 8-bit images, meaning that you have 256 levels of potential brightness in each channel. And that's quite a bit of information. There's no question about it. But if you were to consider that we have a lot more information inside our RAW files, then the whole ball game opens up completely for you. As an example, let me just backtrack for a second here. If we have 256 potential levels of brightness in our red, and we're to multiply that by 256 potential brightness values in our green, and again the same value in blue, we have 256 times 256 times 256, and we end up with the 16.8 million potential shades, hues, colors, brightness values, whatever you want to call it. Now, and that's a lot of frickin' information, there's no question about it. But every time we make an edit in our image to make our image look better, we're moving these pixels around, and a lot of times we're throwing out pixel information. If we do too many edits one after another, we'll eventually degrade our image. But if we shoot in the RAW file format, we're not shooting in 8-bit mode with 256 levels of potential brightness. We're shooting in 12 or 14-bit, which means that, just to generally summarize this, we're probably going to have somewhere close to 16,000 potential levels of brightness in your red, your green, and your blue. That's a heck of a lot of information. We can tweak, we can move these sliders around, and all that kind of fun stuff. Once we're in Photoshop, we can actually start doing that kind of stuff. And we're not going to be, we are going to be throwing out information, but we're not going to be throwing out gobs and gobs of information where we end up degrading our image. It'll take a lot of serious cranking around to start to degrade a 14-bit or even a 12-bit RAW file once it's been put into the pixel-based file format such as a Photoshop file. Okay, so now that we've kind of talked a little bit about that, I want to jump out of this for a second. Okay, so before we do that, let's just say I want to modify this so I have this, and I'm going to take my shadows and I'm going to do something like that, and then I'm going to make my blacks go all the way down to here, and I'm going to change my white balance to something like this. There you go. And I'm going to export that out. So if I export that out as a Photoshop file, my image will have this look. But I can always come back into this afterwards. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click Done. And you can see, there you go, I processed my image. All right. Well, I haven't done anything really with it. I haven't generated a pixel-based image yet, but I do want to show you that I can come into here, go File, Open, Via Rail. It'll open up in the Camera Raw dialog box in a second, the exact same image as it looked when I clicked the Done button.